What happens when the person who feels everything finally snaps? Carl Jung once wrote about a patient who wasn't just emotionally sensitive. She was an empath so deeply tuned into others' pain that it nearly destroyed her. This wasn't a weakness. It was a survival adaptation, one that eventually turned on itself. Jung called it the crucible of consciousness. A point where emotional overload becomes unbearable, and the empath must either break or transform. This video explores Jung's most disturbing case. What happens when an empath, pushed too far, awakens to a terrifying power and becomes psychologically untouchable? But first, we need to understand what creates this breaking point. She came to Jung during the winter of a psychological collapse, quiet, exhausted, and carrying pain that wasn't hers. Jung quickly noticed something unusual. She would flinch at certain words, tense when someone entered the room, and break down without knowing why. She wasn't delusional. She was absorbing everyone, their emotions, their suppressed rage, their grief, shame, confusion, and yet she had no language to express it. She wasn't taught how to defend herself, only how to feel. Jung saw it clearly. She wasn't just an empath. She was what he later called a transpersonal emotional conduit. This wasn't about trauma alone. This was about transformation under pressure, a deep rewiring of psyche triggered by emotional overload. One evening, she snapped. Not violently, but silently. She stopped speaking, stopped reacting, and sat for hours, eyes open, tears falling without emotion. Jung wrote in his notes, she collapsed inward, not from fear, but from cumulative empathy. She was no longer able to separate herself from others. She had merged completely with their wounds, and in doing so, she lost all sense of her own. This was the day the empath snapped, but instead of insanity, something else began. Her nervous system rewired itself. Emotion no longer overwhelmed her. It passed through her. She became untouchable, not because she stopped feeling, but because she finally saw what the emotions truly were. Not hers, not personal, just data, energy, passing signals from the collective unconscious. Jung saw what few therapists ever recognize. She hadn't lost her mind. She had lost her psychological boundaries. Empaths are not just feelers. They are receivers. And when they don't know how to filter, they drown in signals not meant to be held. What happened in her silence was not a breakdown. It was a reorganization. She began to notice. Not every emotion needed to be absorbed. Not every pain was hers to carry. She developed a psychic membrane, a subtle inner filter that allowed emotion to pass through without pulling her into it. Jung described this state as conscious emotional sovereignty. Not detachment, not numbness, but clarity. Awareness without collapse. This is when the empath evolves. When feeling turns into knowing, and knowing turns into strength. Jung saw a pattern, a four-stage psychological transformation that empaths must go through to move from emotional collapse to sovereignty. Stage 1. Emotional absorption. The empath absorbs others' emotions without filters. They internalize pain that isn't theirs and lose their sense of self. Stage 2. Breakdown overload leads to exhaustion, anxiety, identity crisis. This is the snap, the moment where the empath collapses. But it's also the turning point. Stage 3. Emotional differentiation. The empath learns to separate their own emotions from others. They begin to ask, is this mine, or did I absorb it? Stage 4. Emotional sovereignty. The highest level. Emotions still pass through, but the empath no longer identifies with them. They hold presence, not pain. Jung called this final state the empowered empath, a person who feels deeply but is no longer controlled by what they feel. Once the empath reaches sovereignty, they no longer absorb, they reflect. Jung believed the empowered empath served a deeper function for humanity, to reflect the unconscious of others without judgment, distortion, or reaction. These individuals become mirrors, not manipulators. They don't force change. They trigger awareness simply by existing. In their presence, others feel seen, but not always in a comfortable way. Why? Because when the unconscious is reflected, it feels like confrontation, even though no word is spoken. The sovereign empath holds a rare kind of power. They awaken insight without saying anything at all. But this gift comes with a demand. They must stay grounded. Otherwise, they risk falling back into absorption. Jung warned, an awakened mirror must never forget that what it reflects is not its own. Jung didn't just study empaths. He was one. He too experienced the collapse, visions, dreams, and terrifying insights that almost broke him. But unlike Nietzsche, whose visionary perceptions spiraled into madness, Jung stayed grounded. He documented. He integrated. Then there was Meister Eckhart, a mystic who described the loss of self not as destruction, but as divine awakening. Jung called these people differentiated perceivers, those rare individuals who see through collective illusions and are forced to rebuild themselves from within. Some break, some awaken, some become guides for others still trapped in projection. The patient who came to Jung was not alone. She stood in a lineage of souls who carry the burden of perception. So what happens when the empath no longer breaks, but becomes whole? They become the bridge between the unconscious and the aware, between shadow and light. This isn't a journey for the weak, but if you've ever felt like you were too sensitive, like you felt too much, there's a reason. You were never meant to stay broken. You were meant to awaken. Empaths aren't here to be victims. They're here to transmute pain into clarity and fear into transformation. You are not alone in this journey. Join a growing community of sovereign empaths, deep thinkers, and inner explorers. This channel is dedicated to you. Subscribe for weekly videos on Jungian psychology, shadow work, and emotional alchemy. And remember, feeling deeply isn't weakness. It's the beginning of power. Like, share, and comment if this resonated with you. Let's awaken together.